The Bank of Canada held its benchmark interest rate steady at 2.75% today as policymakers wait for more clarity on how tariffs will impact the economy. The central bank says there was consensus among its governing council for a second consecutive rate pause after inflation data showed unexpected firmness in April and the economy topped expectations in the first quarter of the year. But the Bank of Canada is expecting more weakness in the coming months as businesses and consumers rein in spending and the tariff impact starts to show up in economic data. Economist Dr. Moshe Lander joined us for more on the rate decision.
Dr. Lander, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure.
Now, the Bank of Canada said that inflation data showed unexpected firmness. What does that mean?
It means that those tariffs are starting to spill over into higher prices. So we saw that the most recent inflation data actually dropped. But if you take out food and energy prices, inflation was actually rising. And so the Bank of Canada is looking at that, saying that this is not just some one-off that a carbon tax was canceled. It's that those tariffs are starting to push prices up. So I don't know that they necessarily want to go right to increasing interest rates, but they're going to watch and see how much damage is being done to the real economy, how much damage is being done to inflation, and that's going to decide the direction when they do move on where interest rates go next.
Do we have an idea on the total economic cost of both the tariff uncertainty and the tariffs that are in place?
Well, we've seen that GDP is falling now. And so where we've been talking in Canada about declining growth rates and the risk of a recession, we're now seeing the beginning embers of an actual recession. We need to see the data, of course, continue to see that the economy is shrinking. But the fact that it has started to is something that we haven't seen since COVID. And so there is a real worry then that the longer these tariffs remain in place, and with the increase in steel and aluminum tariffs from 25 to 50%, at some point that does start to drag growth maybe even further into negative territory. Sustained long enough, you got your recession.
And what do you think the Bank of Canada would need to see to lower rates again?
Well, it's really two competing forces now at play here. And this was the worry that I expressed back when Trump was reelected in November. On the one hand, you're going to see the economy starts to decline. That should necessitate interest rate cuts. But at the same time, you're starting to see inflationary pressures. And so that should necessitate interest rate increases. Which one of these two forces wins out determines the path of interest rates going forward. So if the economy really does decline in a meaningful way, the Bank of Canada might say, look, we can't afford to try and keep inflation under control by holding interest rates and ruining the real economy in the process. If inflation's the thing that starts to take off, then even if we see mild decreases in GDP, they might say that's a price worth paying. We cannot let the inflation genie out of the bag again. Canadians will remember from 2022 and part of 2023 how much damage was done merely by having inflation reach into the high single digits.
And on the other side, what would cause them to potentially increase rates?
Well, it's if that inflationary force wins out over the decline in GDP. And so if they feel compelled to try and stop that inflation train from leaving the station, they might go ahead and just increase interest rates, recognizing that that's going to hurt consumers, particularly consumers with mortgages coming up for renewal in 2025 and 2026. They might say, listen, I can't help you right now. That's the thing with monetary policy is it's a one size fits all. And it's not just for every province, but it's for every individual and business as well. And so there's certainly going to be some people who say the last thing that I need right now are increases in interest rates. But it's one of those things that if the Bank of Canada says the inflationary threat is real, they might move on that rather than being lax about it the way that they had to in the tail end of COVID.
And with Donald Trump's new announcement today that he's implementing 50% tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from Canada, how much of a role does this play in the Bank of Canada and the interest rate?
Well, that's part of the uncertainty that they're talking about. And of course, it happens to come on the same day when the Bank of Canada is making that interest rate decision. But at what point do the job losses start to accumulate? And if the job losses accumulate, this is going to put more stress on the government to try and provide support to them. Tax revenues are going to be smaller. The deficit's going to be bigger. And to finance that deficit, governments have to borrow money. And if they have to start borrowing money at higher interest rates, that means that there's going to be less money for public services and other sorts of support and transfer programs. So the Bank of Canada is going to be looking at that as well. The Bank of Canada is the agent and advisor to the government. And so they want to make sure that they're not putting the government into a position where fiscal policy might not be able to work anymore either because of the constraints that the Trump tariffs are doing to the Canadian economy.
Dr. Lander, thank you so much for the time today.
Anytime.